Wow, there is a lot of love in this passage, right? It was said over and over again, but then again, as the song goes, all you need is love, right? Our world certainly needs love. Beth Moore recently tweeted out how to change the world: love like a first grader on Valentine's Day. Remember when you were at that age, or your children, everyone got a Valentine, no exceptions. But recently, I have read posts that are telling us that love is not enough, that love is not the most important thing in a relationship. And so as I read this article, that the author had a list of things that she felt was important, I realized that we really don't know love at all. Because love is more than a warm feeling toward another being. As the first letter to the Corinthians tells us, love is patient. Love is kindness. Love is not competitive. Love is not dishonest. Love is not resentful. Love celebrates the truth. Love is loyal, hopeful, and respectful. Now, I imagine you would consider yourself a loving person. All of us would consider ourselves loving people. So what is the problem in our world? Why does Jesus need to keep teaching about love? Love, love, love. Well, it turns out his teaching includes not just loving ourselves or loving our family members or loving those who will love us back, but Jesus is saying, hey, the world will be a better place if and when we love our enemies as well as we love our friends. Author and seminary professor Roberta Bondi reminds us in her writings on love that we, who are made in the image of God, that would be all of us in this room and at home and around the world, we have the capacity to love like Jesus. Divine love is a part of our DNA. And Jesus was our model on how to love. Jesus, if you remember, included the people that society deemed as outcasts and sinners. He included them at his table for dinner. And even he shared his Last Supper with folks like Judas, who he knew would betray him, and he washed Peter's feet, even though he knew Peter would publicly reject him. Jesus speaks about love so much because love is important. Loving others, especially our neighbors who are our enemies, will place us in the kingdom of God, this scripture said. In fact, Jesus calls us children of the Most High when we love unconditionally. Love stands at the heart of the Christian life. Love builds community. Love is the way of praying and the way of living in the world around us. There's an ancient story about some early Christian brothers who were living in a monastery in Gaza. They experienced some conflict. Well, actually, they were acting unloving toward each other. It seemed that their communication became fractured, and the brothers were not being very brotherly. So the head monk, in an attempt to encourage them to value actions of love, gave them an illustration. He took out a compass and inserted the point. All remember what a compass looks like, right? Inserted a point and drew a circle. And then he pointed at the center point and pointed out that it was the same distance if you come from the circumference and to the center point, it was always the same distance from any point on the circumference. Let's suppose, he told the brothers, that this circle is the world and that God is the center. And if we would draw straight lines from the circumference to the middle point, these lines would represent human beings. Now, I have a picture of a wheel. I think I have a picture. There you go. I really, really wanted to bring that huge Conestoga wagon wheel that's down at the museum down the street, but I didn't know how to get it here. So it shows up pretty good here. Choose a spoke in this wheel and imagine that it is you. And then look around the spoke and imagine that another spoke is your neighbor or your spouse or the person who lives across the street that you still don't know yet. Someone in your apartment building that you have a rough time with. And notice that we are all connected to the center, to God. And as we move closer to the center, moving closer to God, we are indeed moving closer to each other, even to those who we say are our enemies. The brothers in the monastery knew in their heads that they and all of us were created in community, in communion with each other. But they needed to be reminded that their behavior will affect how strong their love will be, how strong their community would become. And we too, today, need to be reminded of this. Along with, we need to be reminded that we need each other as we walk this journey of life. We need one another to help us in our relationship with God, and we need that center point. We need God. We need divine love to help us with our relationship with each other. But I need to point out something. There will be times when we will encounter folks who Scott Peck calls people of the lie. Folks who, even though you point out that they are being abusive, don't change or even attempt to change. Yes, we are called to be kind. Not just nice, but be kind, because niceness will not fix an abuser. So we will need to set boundaries with those who are abusing us. And we will still need to forgive. We will still need to be loving and kind. But if one cannot stop their abuse, we will need to create space between us and them. You know, over the past several years, I have struggled how difficult it has become for us as a nation to love one another. It is almost like we have just moved to opposite sides. We've moved apart, each group solidifying their stance on certain issues, from who vaccinates and who doesn't vaccinate, and who is on this side of race issues and who is on that side of race issues. One of my favorite professors, Tokunbo Adelakun, try to say that, Dr. Adelakun was easier. He's a Nigerian-American preacher and professor. He was recently interviewed, and he expressed that it is difficult for us today to express compassion because of these widening class disparities, and because of the systemic gender oppression, and because of increased racial animus, intense ideological divisions, and religious fear-mongering. But he adds the twin beasts of collective egoism and individual hedonism, are the most enduring threats against compassion in our present moment. Egoism and individual hedonism. Because our quest for power, privilege, visibility, and status actually turns our psychic energy and emotional energy inward. Thus, we are denying our God-given ability to understand and honor the humanity of others. We are called to understand and honor one another. So let's go back to the wheel illustration. Each spoke is important. But as human beings, we will need to move from our ego to othering. Not just thinking about ourselves, but to honor all the other spokes. Now, I don't have any ancestors, as far as I know, who came across the United States on a Conestoga wagon, but, we all read stories. So if one of those spokes went out, what happened? They were stuck somewhere, right? And so it's an important thing to remind ourselves as we look around this room, as we think of our family and friends who are not here with us, that we still need each other. We still even need those who think differently than us, those we may call our enemies. Coco Kondo was 8 months old, and she was on her mother's lap when the first atomic bomb hit her home city of Hiroshima. They were in the church parsonage. Her father was a Methodist pastor. He had left early in the morning to his office. And so suddenly the house crashed down upon them, and baby Coco and her mother were trapped beneath the rubble. But Coco's mother wasn't deterred by the rubble, and she pushed all that rubble apart, and she made a hole and placed little Coco out into the daylight. Coco recalls that her mother later described that the air all around them was completely different. Fires were everywhere, and Coco says they barely made it. In the days after the bombing, her mother cared for her while her father would row a boat ferrying victims to the other side of the river. Although Coco doesn't remember the actual bombing, her father's ministry in the following years helped to shape Coco to understand this situation. Her father created the Hiroshima Maiden Project, which assisted young girls who had become disfigured from the attack. And he worked with the Moral Adoption Project, which raised funds in the United States to build orphanages in Hiroshima for war orphans. Coco says that as a child, she thought, if they had never dropped that bomb, many children wouldn't have had to become orphans. And so she says, she thought, someday, when I'm grown up, I am going to get revenge. Well, a decade later, when she was 10, her father was invited to an American talk show, the one that's called This Is Your Life. I don't know if you ever heard of that. She was invited to be on that, or he was invited to be on that, to talk about the day the bomb dropped. He brought 10-year-old Coco with him. She says her father told how he saw the whole city on fire and many people running away from the city in silence, their skin peeling off. It looked like a procession of ghosts, he said. Well, Coco was sitting with her father on stage while he spoke. And then they brought in Captain Robert Lewis on stage. Lewis was the co-pilot on the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb over Hiroshima. And he told the story of the day he dropped the bomb and said that he then entered into his log, "My God, what have we done?" Coco was so shocked because as she tells it, "I wanted to meet those people who owned the airplane so I could get revenge." She said she was staring at his eyes, thinking, "You're the bad one. I'm the good one." But then she saw Lewis crying and thought, "He's the same human being as me. If I hate, I should not hate this guy. I should hate the war itself, which we human beings have caused." Coco left her seat and came close to the captain, and she took his hand. She reports that, "I just wanted to touch his hand because I thought that would be my way of showing, I'm sorry I hated you, but it's not you who I should hate." And when Captain Lewis felt her hand in his, he squeezed her hand tightly. That meeting changed the course of Coco's life. She decided she wanted to fight for peace. Captain Lewis died in 1983, but every year Coco goes to the park that honors the dead of Hiroshima and always remembers the man who dropped the bomb on her city. And she prays, "Captain Lewis, please rest in peace. We shall never repeat our mistake." Loving our enemies will call us to see them as human beings just like us. Loving our enemies will call us to do hard things, call us to leave our comfort zones and perhaps be like the Good Samaritan in one of Jesus' favorite parables. It will cause us to risk fears in order to show compassion, love to someone in need. Someone in our society that we call enemy needs for us to show kindness and love to them. Thanks be to God.